Going over the parts needed for turning out the pen blanks at the mini lathe. The parts that we'll need usually typically keep to the left of the lathe. In one case we have a large lathe, in this case we have a mini lathe. Most of the parts that keep are on the cart that's to the left of this lathe. Some of the actual parts are, for one, a caliper, and this caliper is preset by me with a tape measure to what the directions say for turning a pen is 11/32. So I'm going to finish turn before sanding my pen blank down to 11/32, and this caliper will help me go along the pen blank in order to see if we're at that diameter. Have a squaring tool that has a drill shaft with a cutter head towards the drill chuck, and in this case I just chucked it up into a drill chuck that will fit into, it has a taper for the headstock. Mandrel, and this is a pen mandrel that our pen blanks will go on. This has a collar system that you can loosen in order to set the mandrel shaft shorter or longer. In this case, ours are preset for a 2-inch blanks. You have at the end here's the taper end that'll go into the hand stock for the mandrel, and you have a brass nut that goes on the end of the mandrel, and on the actual mandrel itself there are 3 little collars, and I'll show you what these actual collars do here in just a minute. So that is actually all the pieces then to the mandrel itself. Actual spacers are the diameter of the pen spacer and the pen clip and cap, and also the pen end. So when you turn down the blanks, they need to be no smaller than these actual spacers. Okay, turning tools, we're only going to really need 2, and those are located at the back of the headstock. And these turning tools that we'll mainly use, I have one that is a gouge, and you see it's a round with an angle at the end of it, and this will be used for roughing the wood blanks down. And then I also have a an angled V-shaped tool, and this will be used for then finishing the wood blanks. So those are the 2 tools I'll use, and I keep those pretty handy for when we get to the process of turning down the wood blank. The lathe itself, to the back, there's a light, and I like to use the light because I can see the pieces as I'm turning them better, so I use a light. At the back there is a tool holder, and that'll keep my 2 turning tools. Okay. To the left of the lathe, and these are the bed ways, left of the lathe is the headstock, and there's a hand wheel at the back, and then here's where our spindle goes. Okay, so our tapered ends for our mandrel and our squaring tool will go inside of there. Digital readout here for the RPM that the machine will be spinning, and I'm actually going to go to 2 different RPMs. One RPM is about 920 RPM, and that's the slowest speed it'll go for roughing, and then I'll end up going to a 2000 plus RPM for the finishing process. And then in front of the headstock is actually a knockout tool, and this goes at the back of the headstock in order to knock the mandrel or the squaring tool out. Okay, I also on the bedways then have a tool rest, which I'll use to rest my tool on as I'm making the cuts for the roughing and the finishing. And then I have a tailstock. It has a live center in it, so it's a centering tool with a bearing in it, and that will go to the tool rest and the tailstock. I'll show you how to adjust those when we put the mandrel in place. And then down to the right, or actually right underneath the tailstock here, there is a on-off switch, which may be a little bit difficult to see in the video, but to the left of that, which I think you can see, there is a RPM adjustment knob. And again, we want that adjusted all the way to the slowest speed which will be about 900 RPM. The other thing we'll end up doing is up here on the wall, and I think you can see that from the camera, but up here are our sandpaper, and it's located as the first grit we use is 120, second grit we use is 220, and then the third grit we use is a 320. Okay, so you end up using those for the final sanding process. Okay, and then once the sanding is done, we have a varnish material that's called shell wax. And this is basically a varnish that will then make the final smooth, shiny coating on the pen blank. Types of pen shapes we can do, and I just list a few. One of the more common ones is a straight pen style. There is straight tapered, so you can taper the very ends of the pen blank. The barrel curve, which is essentially called the cigar. Now, there's a couple of samples here. There's a mandrel here that's been cut, and you see all the pen blanks themselves are down to the diameter of the spacers. They've been sanded, and one has a finish, one does not, but they are straight cut to be in line with the actual spacers. So that's called a straight cut pen. This is an actual pen itself. That's just a factory built, and the back of it is a straight cut, and then the front of the pen is actually a cigar or barrel curve. So again, there's different styles. These are only a couple of samples of styles. The best way to actually find out all the styles is to go on to Google and Google wood pen styles, and you come up with lots of different styles of pens. We tend to stick to the standard style pens here, just because we don't need to, try to get too fancy and then ruin pen blanks, because you do glue in the pen blanks themselves. Okay, so to start, we are going to square the ends of our pen blanks. So to do so, we're going to grab the squaring tool that is chucked up in the drill chuck. I'm going to move my tailstock end tool rest out of my way. I'm going to take the tapered end of the drill chuck, and I'm going to push it into the headstock of the drill. I'm then going to take my wood blank, and this process here can tend to be a little bit intimidating. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold on to the pen blank, and I'm going to slide it over the drill end of the squaring tool, and I'm going to push it into the cutting part of the squaring tool, and I'm going to cut until and in this case you see a little bit of glue, so I'm going to cut the glue off, and I'm going to cut until it leaves an indent, a slight indent, into the end surface of this blank. And then I'm going to turn over and do the same thing on the other side. And then I have 3 other blanks. I'm going to make 2 different pens here that I'm going to square. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the machine on here, and you're going to see this process. And I want it down to the lowest setting for the RPMs, which is about 900, a little over 900 RPM. And I'm just going to again take this, and it seems to be a little bit intimidating, but I'm going to thread it on to the end of the drill, and then I don't have to over push too hard. And I'm going to back off every so often to get the wood shavings that are on there off. And I'm just going to cut it until it leaves a smooth, flat surface. And I'm going to spin the blank around. And again, I'm going to turn to it on that side also until it leaves a slight indent and squares again. On one end, it's going to clean the glue off because it did leave glue on the side that I initially pushed the pen copper pieces in, or brass pieces. To remove my drill chuck from the lathe, I'm going to take my knockout tool, I'm going to keep it tapered a little bit sideways. I'm going to take a wooden mallet at the back, and I'm just going to tap on it, and you see it'll take the drill chuck out and my tap out tool on the back side. Okay, now I'm going to take my mandrel. It's preset for length already, so I'm going to take the brass fitting off the end. I'm going to take off 2 of my spacers, leaving 1 in place. I'm going to take one of my blanks, slide it on. I'm going to put then a spacer, and then I'm going to take a second blank and thread that on, and then my final spacer and my brass fitting or nut at the end. And I'm just going to hand tighten that just slightly. Then I'm going to place the tapered end into the headstock. I'm going to bring my tool rest forward. Now, to adjust the tool rest, you turn the knob, the silver knob in front. Okay, and I'm going to turn it towards the headstock in order to loosen it up. I'm going to bring it over and just get it out of the way for now. And then to adjust the tailstock, at the very back is the silver handle. You lift up or you press down on that. It'll bring the headstock to the very end of the mandrel. It's actually tapered in there to accept the live center. And then I'm going to push the silver knob up and lock it in place. Then this little black handle at the top, I'm going to loosen that, and I'm going to turn the end of the tailstock to tighten it up slightly. And it doesn't have to be overly tight. And then I'm going to tighten up this to lock it in place. Okay, now once this is all in place and it's semi-tightened into the headstock, I'm then going to take that brass fitting again and hand tighten it. Cut in line within the board that you're cutting when we're doing the pen blank making process. And you might want to just number those 2 pieces so maybe you label it 1A, 2A, and then that way you can make sure you keep them in line for the pen. And again, that's if you're worried about the grains in the pen to make them look, uniform. In my case, I'm not overly worried. I like whatever grain pattern we can have, even if they're opposite grain patterns. So I just chose 2 different pen blanks in order to turn these down. Now, when I go to the pen assembly, I'm going to make sure these 2 blanks are together because I'm turning them together. So I'll keep whatever means it takes to keep these together now from this step. I'm going to either label them or just make sure maybe put them in a bag or something together so that I can keep track of these 2 together at this point. Now, before that, not overly necessary, but if it's something that you prefer, then you want to make sure you keep track of the grains of the pen blanks. Now, the tool rest I'm just going to bring up, and I'm going to place it so that it doesn't quite touch the brass fitting, and I don't want it to touch the steel piece at the headstock of the mandrel either. So I'm going to keep it slightly away, and when I say slightly, I say about a 1/8 of an inch or so away, and I'm going to tighten down the tailstock. Now, if the tool rest is not adjusted up or down or tipped front to back here where you want it, you loosen up this lever, and then you can move it up or down and side to side. But in this case, this one's set right where I need it to be, so I'm not going to readjust the adjustment. Okay. Now, the tool I'll use first is obviously my roughing tool, and that's the one with the curve at the end. And I'm going to take this now. When I hold this against the tool rest, I'm going to make sure it's held against the tool rest at all times. I'm going to be slightly above center, okay, slightly above center, so I'm going to keep it the back side of the tool pointed down, and I am going to go across the wood blank really lightly. And I'm not forcing any pressure in, just really lightly allowing the tool itself to cut. Okay, now, to keep the tool from bouncing up and down, because it does get a little bit bouncy in the very first step here, I'm going to make sure that I keep the back of the tool in towards my stomach in order to keep it braced. So I'm going to hold it at the back with my hand, keep it in towards my stomach. I'm going to keep my other hand up towards the tool rest, placed underneath the tool to help me guide side to side. And this hand here is going to move my tool side to side in my cutting process.